Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. It's another Dump the Corruption show. Tonight,
with police sirens as well.
we're going to talk about the topic for tonight is going to be super PAC spending. And I'm being joined by my friend, Greg Mallard of the Revolution Evolution.
Which will be back here soon whenever I can
Manage
log
to get
back
it
into
back.
my account.
And I'm happy to say Greg is with us tonight. So, welcome, Greg.
Glad to be here with you, as always.
Good. Okay, we're going to go over some open secrets data tonight.
Ooh, my favorite thing.
Yeah, I know it's very, very interesting data, but in some
have you
ways,
ever have you been on that website called ALEC Exposed to see how many of your state legislators are just as corrupt as the federal level?
no, I haven't been on ALEC Exposed. I guess it's ALEC Exposed, right?
Yeah.
Uh, okay, but I think I'd love to go there now that you mention it. I'm sure they got a lot of interesting stuff because
They have a lot of dirt on state senators and state house reps. And if you really want to see their dirty dealings with corporations and all the shady nonsense that they are up to, Alec Exposed is a really great resource because not only do we need to focus on dumping the corruption on the federal level, but we also need to focus on the local level, which is your state and your state level.
yep, I agree. Did you happen to notice whether there's anything on there dealing with Annette Cleveland? She's in the state senate in Washington.
Oh, they have every single state legislator on there. All you have to do is go on there and type it, and it has it categorized by each state. And it has a list of each of your state representatives, your state senators, and it will blow your mind at how many Democrats is even involved with Alec when they're supposed to be a Republican organization.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure they're good at bribing the Democrats as well. And I think we need to know that.
Oh yeah, like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. You and I are not part of that big club.
Right, but the Democrats are part of that big club. I'm
Oh
afraid
yeah,
Democrats in the state legislatures are.
that's why
Anyway,
people like Cora Emanuel told along with him, Madeline, and many others, said that that is nothing but sheer political theater.
oh yeah, I know. Uh, we need to know about Annette Cleveland, okay, and Andrea Cousins, okay, in New York, and Carl Heastie.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, those are key people, okay, at this point. And I'm sure we need to look into a number of California state legislators too, especially
I
on the Democratic side,
I
because
have been
mayor
looking
bills
into.
keep getting sidetracked.
I've been taken here recently and looking into my own state legislatures, laters, and people in surrounding state house and state senate districts.
Hi, Steve Wolfbrandt. It's good to see you here. We're going to be going over some open secrets data tonight, and Greg Mallard, okay, is joining me. Uh, I'm going to pull up the open secrets data now. It's very revealing in some interesting ways. We've already covered some of the super PAC spending, but there are details that I want to go into tonight. So this is outside spending data. performed by the super PACs. So just to remind everybody, there are 2,476 super PACs. That's the number of super PACs now. Remember, super PACs can raise as much money as they want. There are no limitations. They can also spend as much money as they want, but they have to disclose all contributions of $200 and over. And they also aren't able to coordinate with the campaigns. But other than that, they can do whatever outside spending they want to do because the Supreme Court views the outside spending as equivalent to free speech.
All brought to you by the Supreme Court ruling in favor of Citizens United under a Democrat administration.
Well, that was under a Democratic administration, but of course the Supreme Court at the time had a Republican majority. It was only a 5-4 majority then. Now it's 6-3, but it still was a Republican. Court, and the vote on that court was 5-4 in favor of the decision that was made. So, in 2022, these 2,476 super PACs raised $2.7 billion. And they spent $1.365 billion, which was really only about 50% of what they raised. So the first thing to keep in mind is, what do they do with the other half of the money? They didn't spend it. Given their limitations, they're probably saving it for 2024. That's quite a big war chest to start off with from the end of 2022 to 2024. Gives them a real leg up on the potential for them to spend.
Yeah, that's really a lot of money to even start out with. There's no telling how much money they are going to raise and spend in 2024.
Right, but they start off with $1.365 billion in the war chest as of the end of 2022. That's really big money to start off with.
Yeah, that's almost half of what they spent.
Yeah. So Open Secrets says that 60.96% of that, $832,350,737, was spending that had a conservative orientation. And 468,000, okay, a little more than half as much, 34.29%, was spent by super PACs that had a liberal orientation. Now, of course, the terms conservative and liberal are not so widely used these days. Conservative is certainly widely used, but liberal is not so widely used. Of course, we frequently refer to progressives. When liberal is used, it's normally a derogatory term.
I use a lot of derogatory terms.
Yeah. Okay, so it's normally a derogatory term used by conservatives to describe all Democrats.
And leftists like me.
Yeah, I'm leftist like you, but in other words, they lump together people guilty of many different kinds of sins. Okay, and they call us all liberals, and they call all the super PACs oriented that way, even though they're not oriented all in the same way, okay, as liberal super PACs. Okay, but even if you take those categories as meaning something, though, what you come out with is that the conservatives have a 61 to 34% okay, advantage. So super PAC spending goes much more into the conservative or right wing box than it goes, I would say, into the centrist, okay, and left wing box. Uh, and that's just the way things are, okay, in our political system. Now that's reflected somewhat in the two groups that we're first going to look at. The Senate Leadership Fund, okay, is a conservative group. Believe me, it's a Republican group. I think the Senate Leadership Fund Super PAC is run by Mitch McConnell specifically.
Don't surprise me none.
Okay, its independent expenditures in 2022 were $246 million. It raised $290 million. Okay, so there were what, $44 million at the end of the campaign that was unspent. And if you think this, okay, is inefficient, then you need to look at the Democratic equivalent of that fund. That is this Senate Majority PAC, which is actually a super PAC, of course. And it is run by Chuck Schumer, known in some circles, oh, I'm not going to say it. It's cute, but it doesn't really mean anything. So he runs that PAC. Now, they actually outraised the conservatives this time, or at least they outraised them with respect to the fund that's controlled by the Senate leader, by their Senate leader. Schumer actually outraised Mitch McConnell.
That's surprising.
Yep. $337,349,000, roughly, to $289 million, almost $290 million raised by Mitch. Interestingly, though, only $162,490,000 of that money was spent by Chuck Schumer. So, less than 50% of that money was spent by Chuck Schumer, a little less than 50%. So he saved a little more than 50% for 2024. Now, the Democrats did retain control of the Senate by one vote. The vote came out as a 50-50 tie. So, of course, the deciding vote on many things would be the vice president. Now, I'm just wondering why Chuck Schumer didn't spend more. In other words, Mitch McConnell outspent Chuck Schumer by over $80 million, even though Chuck Schumer outraised Mitch McConnell by what? looks like $50 million. So what was Chuck Schumer saving it for? Didn't he think that if he spent the rest of the $80 million, that Democrats might have won maybe 2 or 3 more seats if he put the money in the right boxes? How about the Senate race? Okay, in Ohio, where Ryan,
Or that one in Iowa.
or that one
What?
in Iowa, but the one in Ohio was a pretty close race, and J.D. Vance won. Okay, I wonder whether Ryan would have won if he had another, say, $20 or $25 million to play with. Just wondering, you understand. There were some other very close races which went to the Republicans rather than Democrats.
Like, what the hell was Chuck Schumer thinking? Well, we already know Chuck Schumer don't think hardly anyways.
Well, maybe he thinks hard, but he doesn't think so good. He certainly didn't think so good in this particular instance. He actually outraises McConnell by $50 million, and McConnell outspends him by $80 million. That's got to be rank incompetence. Let's look more at the Senate Leadership Fund outside spending. Once again, the grand total spent was $246 million. $102 million, roughly $103 million, was spent in opposition to 4 candidates who lost. Okay, opposing 4 candidates who lost. And 200.
How much of that? I wonder how much of that money was even in the House as well. Like,
I don't think it was spent in the House at all. I think the money they spent was on the Senate, but we're going to be able to break that down at least a little bit. 230 million, 370,000. Oh, I'm sorry. There was 0 spent supporting 0 candidates who won. Okay, isn't that strange?
very strange.
There was 103 million spent in opposition to 4 candidates who lost. So Mitch was evidently very successful in spending money against 4 Democratic candidates who lost. But what happened to the money that he spent in opposition to candidates who won? I mean, there's roughly 130 million left on the table there that Mitch actually spent. He must have spent them in opposing various candidates who won. Okay, I'm saying in opposing various candidates, Democratic candidates who won. Because, as it says here, he spent 0 supporting any candidates who won. Well, all he was doing was negative spending. All he was doing based on this was negative ads. He didn't seem to actually be supporting any Republican candidates who won. Anyway, I find that very interesting because people keep saying that people don't care for negative ads. But
If I were a candidate running, I would not be focusing on negative ads. I would be more or less focusing on the messaging of how I could help the people within my district rather than negative attack ads, which could easily turn away independent and swing voters. And you've got to be mindful of how you can attract potential voters in the aspect of getting the votes where they need to be.
yeah, you certainly do. Here are statistics that are not, I think, in accordance with the earlier ones I just read off. So again, the total independent expenditures by Mitch and his super PAC were $246 million. Now, for Democrats, of course, there was zero spent. Okay, but against Democrats, there were 222 million in rough terms that was spent. So it is predominantly negative. But evidently, that super PAC spent $18 million for Republicans. It would be interesting to know if any of them won or if they all were losers. Okay, but we don't see that from these numbers. But we do see that there was some spending for Republicans. It was relatively small. It was 18.2 million. There was some spending against Republicans by Mitch. I take it this was probably in primaries. But
Well, Democrats were funding far right candidates in 2000, even far right candidates against people like Summer Lee as well.
yeah, so maybe what Mitch McConnell decided to do was to vote against some of the Republicans that the Democrats seem to be favoring, and he did that to the tune of only $6 million. So basically, he spent maybe 90% of his wad on negative ads against Democrats. Okay, and the majority of the remaining 24 million for Republicans, 18 million or so, only 6 million against the Republicans. So that's, I think, surprising spending. Okay, primarily negative ads. 227 million out of the 246 million were on negative ads. There was very little for spending, and that, okay, is indicated in the bar graph. Okay, the blue was against the Dems, and the red bar is for the Republicans. Okay, only 6 million. So you see that, okay, in that bar graph. Okay, let's go back and let's take a look at what Chuck Schumer did with his 162 million. First, it's clear, of course, that he did not spend enough, or Democrats probably would have done better in the Senate races. I mean, given that he left 80 million bucks, well, he left more than 80 million bucks actually sitting on the table. He left, what was it, something like $250 million that was sitting on the table because he raised almost $338 million. So not quite that much, but a huge amount, okay, he left on the table. So how successful was his spending? He spent $16,860,000 supporting 5 candidates who won. We'll find out they were all Democrats. He spent $99 million opposing 4 candidates who lost. So that was a success. Spent a lot of money, but he defeated 4 Republicans who lost. But then he spent 149. Oh, I'm sorry, that was 149 million. Nope, that doesn't add up to 149 million. That adds up to only about 116 million. So what happened to the other, what, 35 million or so? Was that successful?
Not at all.
Well, we can't tell from here. It's not tallied up. I don't know why it's not tallied yet. But anyway, they give him a success rate of 64% by candidate, and by money, a success rate of 78%. So that looks like it was better than Mitch. But here's another fact. There was an affiliate super PAC. I'm not even sure what that means. But that is called the Georgia Honor Super PAC. And they made independent expenditures of almost $61 million. There was also another super PAC called the Georgia Way Super PAC, but there are no figures for them.
Must be what they spent to keep Warnock in the Senate.
You guessed it. That's what they spent to keep him in the Senate. That's what they spent to. Yeah, I guess he was appointed. Was he appointed at first?
No. That's what they
spent to put him in the Senate.
The way that worked was when Johnny Isakson resigned from the Senate because of health issues. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp appointed Kelly Loeffler as the senator, and then in 2020 there was an election that was like a special Senate election, which come down to Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler on the then Warnock won in a runoff and got elected to the Senate that way.
Oh, and so in 2022,
it was a normal election.
They were trying to keep him in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And they spent $60 million trying to keep him in the Senate.
That's a bit much for a state like Georgia.
It's a bit much for a state like Georgia, but also if you sort of add that to Chuck Schumer's total, we're talking about his raising close to $400 million. Okay, now I don't know if he was the chairperson of the Georgia Honor Super PAC. It might be Warnock himself was the chairperson of that. Probably not, because that would have been too close to coordination of the campaign with the Super PAC. So it was probably headed up by somebody else. I don't know who headed it up. Let's see
If I had to guess, it would probably be somebody in the Democratic Party of Georgia,
Yeah, like maybe Ossoff.
and or a Nakima Williams, the
Yeah.
one that I covered in one of my Dump the Corruption episodes.
Okay, doesn't give any information on who the head of that super PAC was, okay, or is, okay, at this point. But it's very striking that they spent the
60
$60 million.
million in a state like Georgia, which is a bit much. You would expect uh 60 million to be spent in a state like California.
Yes.
Like you would expect something like that in California, but in the south, in a southern state like Georgia, that's a bit much, in my opinion. Like that's way too much, I think, to spend in a southern state like Georgia. Like that that money right there could have been spent in like California, New York, or Texas.
Right. So going back to the money spent for or against candidates, 2021 2022 cycle. Okay, this is spending by Chuck Schumer's fund. He spent a lot more money for candidates than Mitch McConnell did. But even though he left a lot of money on the table, didn't spend it at all, he did spend close to 28 million on candidates. His problem was he should have spent another 60 million on those candidates. He might have had a lot more Democratic senators in the Senate.
Had he done that, like he could have divided 60 million up between three or four and it would have worked out to win. But the Democrats, I think, in my opinion, I don't think they're in it to win it. I think they're more or less in it to protect the status quo, which is what they've been doing all this time.
And I've had that suspicion too. And I'm wondering whether that's why he left the 130 million on the table. Well, is it 130 million? Okay, what's the difference between 162 million, which is what he spent, and the 337 million that he raised? That difference is 170 million. So he left $170 million on the table that he could have used to spend for Democratic candidates in 2022. That 170 million had to be worth at least 3 or 4 Democratic seats if he had put it in the right places. Like Ohio, maybe, like Maine. Wasn't Susan Collins reelected?
I'm, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know, but do not hold that to me.
Yeah. Okay, but anyway, of course, I'm sure he wanted to hold the Senate because he wanted to be the majority leader.
Yeah, if he really were smart about it, which Chuck really isn't that all that smart at all. If he were really smart and he thought that he wanted to hold the Senate, even into a future election, I would have put that much more money into those Senate campaigns to get more people elected. But this is Chucky Boy we're talking about. We know Chucky Boy isn't too smart.
Well, I'm not here to judge how smart or dumb he is. Okay? I'm just saying, though, that this particular decision to spend only 162 million when you got another 170 million still left that's just plain stupid. Okay, and it's no wonder that he just barely held the Senate instead of having like a 55 to 45 lead. It did, however, it gives him an opportunity to blame the Republicans if certain bills don't pass. He can always say, well, we had only 50-50 and we were deserted by Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, and that's why we couldn't get anything done. He wouldn't have been able to say that if he had 55 Democratic senators. Not quite so easily. So maybe that's why he left the 170 million sitting on the table. Then he probably figured, well, he could always spend that money in 2024, hold on to the majority in 2024, and still be golden. But if that's the way he looked at it, and if that's what he tried to do, he was taking a pretty big risk. A pretty big risk of losing the Senate, okay, entirely. Now, generally speaking, there was a lot more super PAC money that went to the Republicans. Why would one conclude that? Because the third biggest super PAC in spending and in raising money was the Club for Growth Action. They're a big neoliberal super PAC, and they spent almost $70 million on this campaign, and they raised $89 million on this campaign. So they left a lot of money unspent as well. Then there was Americans for Prosperity Action. They spent $69 million, and they raised $78 million. Then we talked about Georgia Honor spending $60 million for Warnock. Okay, but then after that, there's a liberal group called LCV Victory Fund that spent $33 million. Not sure on what. Then there's the Women Vote Super PAC that spent $30 million and raised $35 million. Now that's a group whose spending makes more sense in terms of a much smaller gap between the money raised and the money spent.
I just found that Georgia Honor PAC that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They raised nearly 61 million. They spent let's just say their cash on hand right now is a little more than $10,000.
Yeah, because
They spent all that money on getting Warnock or more Democrats elected in 22.
Yeah. They're probably going to form another super PAC for Ossoff because
he's up for re-election in 26.
Yeah, but they'll probably have a super PAC that will concentrate on raising money for him for 26. There was a Republican conservative super PAC, Wisconsin Truth PAC. It raised just about $29 million. I'm sorry, spent just about $29 million and raised a little over $30 million. They were supportive of Ron Johnson.
That's a race that could have been flipped that Chucky boy didn't think about.
That where he didn't put any money in, where he
If
could
he
have
would have spent probably, if I had to guesstimate, 15 million extra in Wisconsin.
he probably could have swung that race over to the Democrat.
Yeah.
Okay, whose name escapes me at this time, but
Mandela Barnes.
Mandela Barnes, he was a pretty good candidate.
He could have taken it. Chucky boy could have taken 15 to 20 million, put it into that race. 15 at the least.
Yes, and the horrible Ron Johnson, the Trumpist.
He would have been blown out the water.
Johnson, who was supporting the January 6th uprising, he could have knocked him out of the Senate.
And he's also anti-trans as well.
Yeah.
Like he supports a nationwide ban on gender-affirming care, not only for our trans youth, but also trans adults.
Yes. Yes, I know. Okay, the next big super PAC at $26 million spent, almost $36 million raised, so left $10,000 on the table for 2024, was the United Democracy Project. Now, who created that super PAC? That is AIPAC's super PAC. They tried and failed to defeat Summer Lee in Pennsylvania. They were instrumental in the defeat of Nina Turner.
Oh, yeah, the DMFI types.
The DMFI types, but separate source of money. In other words, their source of money were the same people who were supportive of AIPAC. They were the AIPAC super PAC, because AIPAC is not a super PAC, it's just a PAC. So AIPAC started them off as their super PAC arm. Then there was the Saving Arizona PAC. That was the Blake Masters super PAC. And they were unsuccessful in electing Blake Masters. Blake Masters was running against Senator Kelly. And he ran unsuccessfully as a Trumpist.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was American Leadership Action in Pennsylvania. Conservative super PAC at $19.5 million spent. $19.5 million spent. They raised $21.9 million. They supported us. That was their big thing. Then there was another one who spent $19.2 million. The name of that super PAC was Honor Pennsylvania. And they supported this other guy, McCormick, who was defeated by Oz, in the primary. And there's to Make America Great Again PAC, certainly a MAGA PAC, right?
Mm-hmm.
$15 million they spent. $73 million they raised. They left $58 million on the table. What were they waiting for? Maybe they're just waiting for Trump to run again. And there was Our American Century, $13.6 million. Spent $14.1 million. Raised. They were pretty efficient then. Sentinel Action Fund. There it just says they oppose. Doesn't say who they opposed. But they spent $13.3 million and raised also $14.1 million. Then there was the Family Friendly Action PAC. A liberal group. Don't know who they supported, but $10.6 million was spent there. There were a lot of groups who spent in the neighborhood of $10 million. School Freedom Fund, conservative. Opportunity Matters Fund, conservative. The Black PAC spent $9.7 million. A lot of super PACs in this $10 million range. There's a National Association of Realtors Congressional Fund, which is not supposed to have an orientation, according to this. Its orientation is X, so neither liberal nor conservative. They spent about $8.5 million. They raised about $17.5 million. Planned Parenthood votes $8.2 million. So an awful lot of super PACs are in that range of what, $8 to $10 million. Still a considerable amount of money if a super PAC wants to target something. They can swing races, maybe not Senate races, but certainly House races. The Show Me Value PAC, they had a specialty. They were opposing somebody by the name of Greitens, who I guess was a Democrat. I think he was a Democrat who lost, because I don't know his name. $7.9 million.
I think Eric Greitens ran. That name does ring a bell. It sounds like a Republican of Missouri.
Yeah, maybe. But they're a conservative group. So the question is, why weren't they supporting him, and what did he lose at? Maybe in the primary. Save America Fund is a liberal group, $7.6 million. They were supporting Ryan, in Ohio. To the tune of $8 million. Let's see if they did any against funding or only for funding. Most of their funding was actually against candidates. It wasn't for. But it says they were for Ryan. They spent $544,517 for Democrats. That means for Ryan, basically. And $7 million, against the Republican candidate, who was Vance, J.D. Vance. In that race. So their viewpoint is liberal. They're a super PAC. And they were supporting Ryan by spending against J.D. Vance. So that's what happened. there. Okay, we're kind of running out of time. So one of the most important things I wanted to point out here actually comes not from the statistics on super PACs, but from the statistics, okay, on PACs. Okay, let me see if I can find that. I guess I have to go. Okay, I have to go to PAC spending. What is a PAC? There it is. What I want you to look at is what the PACs themselves were spending, okay, as opposed to super PACs. Let's look at the top PACs. What they're spending per cycle. National Association of Realtors, $4 million. National Beer Wholesalers, $3 million. These, mind you, are the top PACs. APAC itself in 2022 only recorded here as spending $2.7 million. AT&T, $2.6 million. Also, American Crystal Sugar, $2.6 million. Spending by Blue Cross Blue Shield, $2.5 million. The point, okay, I want to make here is that PAC spending is nowhere near, based on this, is nowhere near the scale of super PAC spending. It's only a fraction of what the super PACs are spending. So we used to think the PACs were a big threat. You know, they were a big threat to democracy. And that was the case before 2010. But in the years since 2010, it's the super PACs that are spending far more money. Now, I have no way of estimating whether super PAC money was, when spent against candidates, is more powerful than PAC money that's actually spent by the candidates in their campaigns. But I have a feeling it is, because the scale of it is so much greater.
It's amazing at how great the scale of the money that they have and have spent is. Like
Yeah.
it's very mind-boggling, to say the least.
It's very mind-boggling. When we look here at the PAC spending from Democratic Party committees, it was $41.65 million in 2002. Well, actually, this is PAC summary totals by party and recipient type, 1990 to 2022. I don't think I believe this. There's something wrong. Something I'm not understanding here. But, oh no, that's okay. In 2022, 41.65 million was spent by PACs, okay, on the Democratic Party. Okay, the Republicans spent 30.94 million on Republican Party PACs. So the total spending on the two parties was roughly 72 million in PAC spending in 2022. What was the total spending again for super PACs? It was $1.365 billion.
That's a lot of money. If these people can afford to shell out that kind of cash, they can easily afford to pay their fair share in taxes. Not like their taxes are going to be used for anything anyways, unless it's on the state level.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It makes a lot of sense to just take their money away from them, because all they're doing is they're poisoning, okay, our elections with negative spending against candidates. When we looked at the super PACs and their outside spending, okay, let me look at that outside spending again. Let me recover that outside spending if I possibly can. Yeah, dig into our list of super PACs. That's where it is. When we looked at the super PACs, we didn't look at too many of them, of course. But when we looked at the individual ones, here, let's look at the Club for Growth. We didn't look at that before. Hey, Greg, are you there?
Mm-hmm. I'm still here.
Okay, did somebody else arrive? It sounded like somebody else arrived. Oh, no, I guess it wasn't anybody else. Sorry. Okay, looking at the Club for Growth, they spent $1.63 million supporting 4 candidates who won, $4.8 million opposing 4 candidates who lost. Their success rate was less than the others that we went through, only 40%. But the important thing I want to point out here is they spent 3 times as much money opposing candidates as they did supporting candidates. And that was the pattern we saw with the other 3 super PACs, okay, that we looked at. Negative ads running against candidates seem to be the dominant pattern. So what I'm suggesting is that the super PACs are poisoning our elections with these negative ads.
And what I don't understand, and this is, I'm an independent voter, like one of the swing voters, and if somebody who was an independent-minded person who has no party affiliation at all, I don't care for negative ads. If you're wanting me to vote for you, stop with the negative bullshit and actually focus on the issues that matter, the issues that will help improve the lives on those who you're going to be sworn in to serve.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. But what we're seeing is that the super PACs that are not directly controlled by the candidates are spending huge amounts of money opposing candidates in what are probably negative ads.
The negative ads really do ramp up during the primary season. That's when they're at their worst.
Well, I don't know. I think in the general they may be very bad too.
Well,
Certainly,
the thing is about the primary, you have more candidates running for office.
yes.
So you're going to see more negative ads being said about this person, that person. But if Joe Biden is that old dog, or that cackling hyena Kamala Harris is the nominee, can you imagine the negative ads that old dog and that cackling hyena are going to get? From the from Trump is going to, I almost guarantee it. Trump will be the GOP nominee for president in 24.
Oh,
And
I think so
there,
too. I mean, he's going away from everybody else.
I don't even Nikki Haley of all people is polling 6% ahead of Biden. And if the Democrats were really smart right now before all of these fundraising deadlines and all that, they would run away from Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg. They would run teetotally away from them and find somebody else to run.
Well,
That is not tied to the Biden Harris administration. Because I think going forward, with just how bad this administration has been, people are going to have that memory of those tied to that administration in their minds going forward.
yes,
So the
yes.
best solution would,
If somebody has worked for the Biden administration, they're not good candidates, okay, for Democrats to nominate.
yeah, that'd be like Pete Buttigieg
And Harris.
and Harris. Those right there, and there are black voters across this country who have came out and said, I would never vote for Pete Buttigieg in a general election or a primary election. And you also got to look back at Pete when and that time he made that slip up and said that some infrastructure is racist. He was part of the racist infrastructure in South Bend, Indiana, where he gentrified whole black and brown communities.
Yes, he did.
He declared he allowed eminent domain to be declared on black and brown communities to uproot them out of their neighborhoods and to move them elsewhere
Yeah,
and
so he could build
whitewash the
condos.
black and brown communities.
Yes, he did.
And I don't remember who it was that was running against him in a primary. I think her name was like Regina something. I don't remember. This is like she was in an interview with Savage Joy, but she would have been a terrific mayor for. But the Democrat establishment rigged it for against her, a black woman,
Yes.
and that's telling all in and of itself that the Democrat Party still does have racist undertones that are still ingrained in the Democrat Party.
Yep. Absolutely.
But
it's absolutely still there.
if the Democrats were smart, they would walk away from that old rotting bag of oatmeal and the cackling hyena and pick somebody else. Sorry,
Yeah.
I have been watching too much hard lens media here lately.
Why do you say that?
Because I watch almost every single video that Kit puts out. RBN,
So
I
what's wrong
watch
with that?
nothing. And I watch also RBN, and I've even been watching a little bit of Due Dissidence and Jimmy Dore.
Ah, okay. Okay.
But
Generally, I've been watching Jimmy Dore, and okay, I've also been watching Sabrina.
Oh yeah, I love Sabby.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
we've got to do.
Then what I usually watch is I usually watch some shows that are more newsy, like shows that are covering the war, shows on geopolitics. Uh,
Like Around the World with Dee and Friends, our partner.
of course, but okay. I also watch Brian Berletic, Anna Duran, uh, okay, Ben Norton,
Ben
uh,
Norton's good.
Max Blumenthal,
Scott Ritter.
Scott Ritter. I love Scott. Okay, and also Colonel McGregor. Okay, I think he's real crazy about some things, but uh, he's got a good, honest feel for the war and what's going on there.
I've also been tuning in because of all what I've been seeing, and I just wanted to make sure it was true. Even the liberal mainstream media like CNN, even the Morning Blow is even going after Joe Biden.
Oh yeah, they would like the Democrats to replace Joe Biden with somebody who can win.
Oh, somebody on Morning Blow the other morning was begging Gavin Newsom to run.
Yeah, I know. I have also had thoughts that they're going to turn to Gavin Newsom. I'm just wondering how they're going to do it. I sort of think what they're going to do is rig it for Biden, and then Biden is going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't really run. I'm too old. I'm too sick. I'm not capable. Sorry, I wasn't able to tell you sooner, but I've just heard from my doctor and that this and that." And so after winning the nomination, he drops out. And then it goes back to the Democratic National Committee to select somebody who did not run until then. And my scenario is that at that point, they're going to turn to Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. That's the scenario that I'm looking at.
Yeah, well, Gavin Newsom is pretty unacceptable too. Okay, we don't know if he's deep state yet.
More than likely is.
Yeah, he doesn't look like he's anybody who's going to kick over the traces.
But the thing is, the younger generation, my generation, which is the millennials, and Gen Z are overwhelmingly rejecting Joe Biden because of the student loan debt issue, along with Medicare for all. Like, I'm not going to vote for somebody who is against Medicare for all. If you're against Medicare for all, that's where my litmus. That's the first. That's the way to earn my vote. If you're for a federal job guarantee, then yes, you get my unwavering support.
Okay, for me, the key issues are, okay, of course, I'm very much for Medicare for all and have always been very supportive of it. But I think two other issues are more important. Okay, the first is the foreign policy issue. We have to abandon the kind of U.S. Hegemony foreign policy that we've been following. This, of course, involves
Ukraine.
the Ukraine war, but apart from the end of the Ukraine war, we have to stop trying to block the Chinese. We have to accept that we have a multipolar world and that we have to learn how to live in it. This is the most important thing.
While we're on the foreign policy aspect, I am for also. I would like for somebody to come out and say that they are also in favor of removing the blockades and the embargoes on Cuba, Venezuela,
Yes, of
lift all
course.
those economic
That's
sanctions.
part of changing the orientation in foreign policy, okay, and coming to terms, okay, with a multipolar world. It also means we have to get rid of the economic sanctions on everybody. We just don't do unilateral economic sanctions anymore because those are against international law, flat out. They're collective punishment. They're prohibited, okay, by international law. But of course, we don't care about international law because we're the hegemon. So, if we abandon becoming the hegemon, what we're going to do then is to get rid of all the sanctions and stop having that as a key part of our foreign policy.
And
And
close those what 800 or 900 military bases across the world.
absolutely, that's part of accepting the multipolar world too. And the other part of it is trying to compete with the Chinese in making good trading deals that are good for other nations, that really take the interests of other nations into account, and that are also good for us. We have to become good partners for
Even
all
with the BRICS nations,
the
we
world.
can become really great partners and allies, even with with a lot of the BRICS nations,
Yes, we can.
if not becoming a participant as well in BRICS. And also, we've also got to come to terms with, do we also want to abolish NATO while we're at it?
Yeah,
Because there has not been a need for NATO since 1991. When the fall of the Soviet Union happened was when the abolishment of NATO should have automatically began. NATO should have been disbanded post Soviet era.
okay, but this foreign policy issue, okay, is the number one issue because if we continue to risk having a nuclear war, either with Russia or China, we're all going to die. So that has to be issue number one. That's sort of short-term extinction for all of us. If we get that problem solved, then we have the problem of a little longer term extinction coming from a climate. So that's got to be the number two priority. Okay, I only get to Medicare for all, okay, as a number three priority because if we go after the number two priority, we get the job guarantee as part of that. In other words, if we're really going to solve the climate emergency problem, we have to also solve the job guarantee problem because the transition has to be a just one. So to me, those are the two top issues. And the third top issue, okay, is the Medicare for all issue. Now, you got to keep in mind, if either Trump or Biden wins this time around, okay, or Gavin Newsom, we're not going to solve the top two issues.
It's gonna. I would like to see Cornel West, which I know it may be unrealistic, but if we can get Cornel West over the 5% national votes, then the Green Party can become federally funded and nationally recognized for once.
Yes, I think that would be a very good thing, but we also have to realize that Cornel West is not going to get more than 5% unless Stump the Corruption is successful.
That's why we need to, when we're conducting our candidate interviews, which candidate interview season is just around the corner. Which there's an independent that's running for president right now. I think his name is John or Joe Stasevich. And he seemed,
Yeah, I remember him from the last campaign. I think it's John Stasevich, actually.
I'm going to talk to him here soon about possibly having a candidate interview where we discuss the issues and ask if he would be on board with dump the corruption.
Yes, it seems to me all third party candidates who are going to run, including Cornel West, should be running a dump the corruption campaign. Because
I would have
of a dump the corruption campaign are, of course,
what I would have
both their
is
Democratic and Republican opponents would be defeated.
I would have on my campaign website how we're going to plan on dumping the corruption. If I were a candidate right now, I would have an outline and use your talking points on how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think candidates ought to be doing that. They should be looking at the rule, and they should be running on the rule as well as other issues. Okay, and if they can persuade people, if we have hundreds of candidates out there from third parties who are trying to persuade, the American people that they will represent the American people, but their opponents from the two major parties will represent only the donors. If they can run that way, I think a lot of them can win.
Something I have been talking about with several people within the Green Party, and this is what they are also in unanimous agreement with me on. If I were the Green Party, even if you don't have ballot access in a set amount of states, don't let that discourage you from running as an independent candidate. Because if you can run as an independent in districts where Democrats and Republicans run historically unopposed, and you give the people a viable alternative as an independent, but you're still in the Green Party, but you're just running as an independent candidate because you don't have ballot access.
Right, and you look for ballot access as an independent candidate, which in some states, it's very practical to get ballot access as an independent candidate.
Oh, you're more in a lot of states, you're more likely to get ballot access as an independent than you are a third party candidate.
I'm sure.
It's that way here in Georgia.
I'm sure it takes a lower amount of signatures to run as an independent in many states.
And I don't know why Cornel West, if he wanted to play this smart, I don't know why he does not use the independent route in states where the Green Party does not have ballot access.
It seems to me Bobby Kennedy is getting forced to run as an independent. And that if he does, he might run an entirely different campaign.
I think he needs to just leave the Democrat primary and just run as an independent, so that way he don't have to go through the rigged primary process, which is obvious. They're going to rig it for either Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or possibly a Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, that's what I think. They have already rigged it. They have already rigged it against him because he's campaigning in states that they don't want anybody campaigning in.
He needs to go to like swing states and start talking to those. If he really wanted to play this smart, he would talk to, those who do not vote at all, the independents, the swing voters, and win that way.
But the most important thing is to get out of the Democratic Party. at this point. Okay, to run as an independent, so he doesn't have to worry about the primaries. He doesn't
And he
have to worry about the super PACs. Okay, because the super PACs, if he runs as an independent, they're not going to pay any attention to him.
and Marianne Williamson might as well get her supporters behind Cornel West. Just drop out and endorse Cornel West right now and just join forces with him and help him win.
Yeah, the only thing is Cornel West doesn't seem to have much attention on foreign policy issues.
He
Even
needs
though he's
somebody
running
that
for the Green Party,
he needs somebody like Pasta to help him with foreign policy.
he needs somebody. Well, of course, he just retained as his campaign manager Peter Dow. Okay, so maybe Dow will get him smarter on some of these other issues. But right now, he doesn't sound good on foreign policy. He doesn't look like he has a coherent understanding, okay, of foreign policy, which means the top issue of changing foreign policy, he's not strong on that issue. He also, even though he's running for the Green Party, he doesn't seem to be that strong on green issues. He doesn't seem to know enough about it. So I think Cornel West has some problems, and if we're comparing Cornel West, okay, with Bobby Kennedy, then we see, okay, that Bobby Kennedy is better on the foreign policy front, and that Bobby Kennedy might even be better on green issues, since he's
Because
worked on green
he
issues.
was an environmental attorney for
Yes,
many decades.
he was, and he won many cases.
Like if he joined forces, even with if he were to drop out of the Democrat primary and join forces with Cornel West on especially on green issues, then that would be a solidified campaign right there.
That would be an excellent campaign, certainly. Yeah, that would be an excellent campaign. I mean, if you combine, okay, a Kennedy candidacy uh, with a civil rights icon, that starts bringing up very strong associations with the 1960s. That could be very popular.
And plus Kennedy, that would help a lot because of him being a Kennedy as well.
Right, but even more, it seems to me that right now, he's the only Kennedy who's really a Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the other Kennedys may be part of the family, but they've all gone center right. I mean, I don't see in one of them who's a lefty, okay, in any particular. Now, I think Bobby Kennedy made a mess of his position, okay, on Israel. And I think it's because he was going after some big money. I think he's making a mistake there. He's got to have a small donation campaign. He's got to get rid of the big money
And get away from the Democrat Party branding as well.
I think so.
Because if he was running right now as an independent, I think that would really increase his support.
Right. And if he was running as an independent and he won, then he could call his shots, okay, with the Democratic Party. if he ran on a dump the corruption ticket and cleaned out the Congress and became the president, then he could clean out the agencies, and he could also clean out the DNC.
He could clean their clock like that.
Like that, because after all, okay, if they're a DNC, then they'll want somebody as a Democratic president to be running the DNC. Anyway, it represents very interesting possibilities. If he wins, he could come back to the Democrats and kick out all the people running the party who aren't really Democrats.
Kick them all out within one swoop.
Yeah. Yeah, just get the Democratic National Committee completely full of other people who are basically Kennedy Democrats.
You know what I think is hilarious as hell? I think it's hilarious how they picked a DNC chair who could not even win an election. Jamie Harrison ran against Lindsey Graham and lost by double digits.
And he lost with $110 million. Spent $110 million on that goddamn campaign, and idiot Schumer gives him $110 million. I mean, I'll tell you, okay, in that election,
if I were the head of the Senate part of the Democrat Party, I would not have put money into that election at all. I would have put a little bit in, but there was no hope in South Carolina. That was unrealistic, and that was and that was like a lot of that money could have went to Ohio. A lot of that money could have went to Wisconsin, possibly Texas.
Oh, yeah, and then there was the $90 million they spent on Amy McGraw in Kentucky.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell they're doing there? They spent $90 million on her, and she was talking about how she was supporting Trump. And they had a perfectly good candidate in Charlie Booker they could have backed there. Charlie Booker might have had a chance. If they gave him $90 million to spend against Mitch, he might have won. And then, of course, it was the main campaign where they gave a huge amount of money to what's her name, Sarah Gideon.
Yeah,
huge amount of money to her, and she blew it.
And they could have easily won Wisconsin. They could have easily won Ohio, possibly even Alaska and Maine.
Yeah.
Instead of putting all that money into candidates who had no chance in hell at winning.
Well, Sarah Gideon probably had a chance at winning if she had run a really progressive campaign.
Yeah, like on Medicare for All and all the other stuff.
Exactly. Okay, exactly. Instead, she ran a centrist campaign against Susan Collins. So basically, what was she going to give to Mainers that Susan Collins wasn't already giving to them? I mean, she ran a stupid campaign.
The Democrats' problem, they don't think. They think with their head up their ass.
I know.
Like they do not think at all.
Yeah, I know. They were too oriented. They're too oriented towards the present and the way things are. And they cannot envision how to change things for the future. They
Like, they
always,
don't think of future elections and all that. Like, had they really thought it out, they could have won Maine in 2020 and also Alaska. And along with in 2022, they could have picked up Wisconsin, North Carolina, and what's that other state? Ohio. Then that would have given them 55 Democrats in the Senate right now.
yeah.
And that would have really helped them. Like, if they lost one or two seats in this
Yeah,
election, then
and they might have won in South Carolina also. I know Lindsay won by 60-40, but if Jamie Harrison had spent his $110 million on a ground game, he might have won.
oh yeah, he would have easily won.
Yeah, if he had spent it on a ground game and if he had gone in for Medicare for all and some of the popular issues, he probably could have won. His problem was that he didn't care about winning.
All he cared about was being. It's like even with Stacey Abrams, they like the Democrats spent like a god awful amount. I don't know how much I think 100 million for her governor's race, and yet she lost by an even wider margin in 2022 than she did in 2018 when she had no ground game. She was canceling events, and then the next day she was on nationally syndicated talk shows. She turned a state race into a national campaign,
And she lost.
and she lost.
And she lost because the national campaign was too conservative anyway.
Way too conservative.
Yeah.
Like, the Democrats' problem, they don't think straight. They don't think straight at all.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Like, that's the main problem that I have with the Democrat Party. And I tried so hard for 2 years to work within the Democrat Party, and I couldn't even do it. Like 6 weeks before the midterms, I was like, yep, fuck it, I'm done.
Okay, are you having greater success with the Green Party?
Oh yeah, we're trying right now to get ballot access in many states. Like, there's a lot of states right now that are pending ballot access and states that are in progress right now.
Are they states that are mainly Democratic or mainly Republican?
Mainly Republican right now.
Yeah, probably because the Republicans would probably like to give the Green Party ballot access because they probably think the Green Party will drain off votes from the Democrats.
It would be nice to, get even Greens elected here in the state of Georgia as independents.
Yes, I agree.
Like, it would be very nice to get probably about the next election, realistically, maybe 10 or 12 Greens elected in Georgia.
Yeah, that would be pretty nice, Greg.
Like, I would love that.
Me too.
Like, that would be one of the best things that could ever happen to the state of Georgia.
Oh, so Bonnie wants to know when you're going to run.
I don't know yet. Because if I were to run, I would run as an independent candidate.
Well, you're an independent person, so.
Yeah, like, I would run as an independent candidate. And that's how I would run my campaign. Like, that's the party. That's how I would run, is solely as an independent. Like, I would have part of my platform be dedicated to dumping the corruption. Like, I would, of course, have dump the corruption be, of course, part of my campaign. Like, that would be like one of the core parts of the campaign is dumping the corruption in the state of Georgia. which
Yes,
is desperately needed.
okay, if you're running as an independent
Mm-hmm.
or as a third party candidate, that has to be what you lead with because you got to get
Mm-hmm.
people running away
And
from
if you tell people, "Oh, I'm running as a green," then they would be like, "Wow, that's somebody that's taking a vote away from a Democrat." Cool. That'd be
right.
funny if I turned that around and won.
Okay, if you turn that around and got them to vote against both the Democrats and the Republicans, that
Oh
would be
yeah.
a way to win. We're joined by Andy Candy, uh, who has shown up, okay, as April Mano because they gave her a problem with her other account. But anyway, she says Dems take voters for granted. Essentially, people of color,
Yeah, they do.
and they won't go for the fascists' jugular. And it's because, as Joe keeps blasting from the mountaintops, because they are in collusion with money in politics corruption. Never broke a bit, got a little energy for a minute. Hi, guys.
Yeah, they have been.
Hi, Andy. Good to see you.
That party is just the Democrat Party would never allow somebody like me to win a primary. So if I were to run, I would be an independent candidate. So that way I don't have to worry about running through a rigged primary process, which that's what many leftists need to start thinking about. Do you really want to run in a rigged primary through the Democrat Party? Or do you want to run free and independent so that way you can breeze right through the primary, not even have to worry about a primary process and win as an independent? Like it can be realistically done. You just need to talk to the independent voters and you need to go out there and talk to people who you know do not vote at all.
But so Andy says, hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
Okay, so I noticed Jason Call is running green this year for
Mm-hmm.
Congress. In 2022, of course, he was running as a Democrat.
Well, that's because he saw that. I think he saw the light at the end of the tunnel and realized, hey, I cannot realistically win as a Democrat, so why not run as a Green?
Yeah, I think he saw that too. And now I think he's happier running as a Green.
Oh yeah, the Green Party welcomed him in with open arms.
Oh, yeah.
Like they're going to.
Yeah, because he's as green as anybody. I mean, Jason's really green.
Like he's a really great guy.
I know he is. I know he is. I love Jason.
Yeah, like I have him on my friends list. Like I think here soon I'm going to be talking to two people who are running in Seattle city council race who are running as Greens. One, I think, don't hold me to this. One, I do think is running in Kashama Sawant's district. Like that would be really good if they won in Kashama Sawant's district. And let's say we get 1,000. Let's say we get probably maybe a couple hundred Greens elected nationally this November, not next November. This November, 2023, as mayors, as city council members, and start turning cities green instead of red or blue.
I know that would be a big thing. I think Kashama Sawant is living in Jayapal's district, isn't she?
I think so.
I'd love to see her run against Jayapal.
That would be great if she joined the Green, because in Washington State, the Green Party does have ballot access. for the Green Party. So it would be something if Kashama Sawant ran in that race as a Green on a strict dump the corruption campaign, because she is unabashed calling out the corporate money in politics. She has always done that.
I know. I love her.
Like if she runs as socialist alternative or a Green, I'd be happy.
Oh, I'd love that. Okay, we got a question from Andy Candy. She says, Joe, when you have a second, did you have night sweats when you or your beautiful wife had COVID?
No,
Did we have
When did
night?
y'all have COVID?
not at all.
We had COVID maybe 3 months ago or so. We didn't even know we had COVID for a long period of time. We only found out when Bonnie went to see the doctor for something else. But she was having what were, essentially neuralgia pains. They were very serious. So we went in to see the doctor about them. And the doctor gave her a battery of tests. And one of the tests that they gave her was a routine test for COVID. And it turned out she had it.
We didn't even know it.
And we didn't know it. And that's when I knew that I probably had it too. So I did a home test, okay, at the time. And it confirmed that I had it also. But I had gotten it about 3 days before Bonnie. In other words, I sort of traced it back to an incident, okay, at a particular time. And so I had it for 13 days. Bonnie had it for 10 days. So it was too late for Kaiser to do anything for me. I just kind of wrote it out, and got better. Okay. With Bonnie, what they did is they gave her Paxlovid because she was only at 10 days, and that could be successful at 10 days. We have Kaiser Permanente insurance here. Okay, and okay, so we got the Paxlovid treatment for Bonnie. It cost us zip, which was very good, and I didn't have to spend any money on it at all because I didn't know I had it till 13 days, and then it was almost over, so I wrote it out. So we had it. It was very mild. Okay, it was the Omicron variant.
I had COVID like February of last year. I had it for like a week. But what helped me was Alka-Seltzer and Zyrtec.
Interesting.
I took Alka-Seltzer and Zyrtec, and it helped me out.
What I was taking was actually turmeric. In other words, when I start to feel achy or something like that, I'm getting inflammation, and I feel I'm doing the inflammation. Then I usually turn to natural remedies of some kind. And since I didn't know I had COVID, then I did it, on that occasion. And I was never seriously under the weather. Okay, it was mainly a runny nose.
Yeah.
I recall, for a number of days. Didn't even have too much of a cough. Okay, so I was lucky. Now we had one vaccine and 3 boosters, was it? So we had up to that time, maybe 3 booster shots, as well as, the original shot. Okay, we did not know at that time that, the data wasn't really clear, that the more COVID mRNA shots you get, the greater you have a chance of getting COVID. I mean, we didn't know that at that time. Now the data is out, and it's quite clear that a good way to get COVID is to take more and more of the boosters. Okay, so now, it comes time to make a decision, okay, as to whether we should be taking the fall booster shot, okay, or not.
I've only took the two regular shots and the two booster shots. That's all I've had.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to take another one, okay, because I've been watching some statistics from John Campbell, the British guy on YouTube, who's a doctor of nursing and an expert in public health. And he was providing some statistics today comparing your risk of going to the hospital, okay, if you take the vaccine, with your risk of getting COVID if you don't take the vaccine. And he was basically showing, or the data was showing, he wasn't trying to rig it or anything, okay, but the data was showing that it may not be a good idea of having the greater risk, of getting COVID again because you've taken the vaccine.
I
Also,
haven't even worn a mask since like February, March. I've quit.
yeah, we quit using, and I forget when we quit using masks, but it's been a number of months now. Once we recovered from COVID, then of course we had a natural immunity to it, and the natural immunity is longer lasting than the vaccine immunity. So we were, expecting immunity of at least 6 months to a year. Okay, but to answer your question, Andy, we didn't have the night sweats.
Not at all.
Okay, not at all. Bonnie hardly felt anything, except for the neuralgia. We now think, the neuralgia pain was associated with COVID, but we didn't know it at that time.
I've never had neuralgia before.
Okay, but that was the only symptom that she encountered, and what I was suffering with, was basically a runny nose. I don't even think that I missed a live stream during that period of time. I just went, right on with what I was doing. And since we didn't know we had COVID, we continued to go shopping during that period of time. In fact, I think we caught COVID when we went shopping at a Trader Joe's, and we were raided on at the cash register by someone we knew and we were friendly with. And okay, the way we traced that back to COVID was he told us he had this, he really felt lousy, he had this bad cold and this and that.
When I had COVID like last year, my symptoms were like a really bad sinus infection. That's what my symptoms were like, was a sinus infection.
Yeah, that's so often the way it, manifests. Okay, Andy asks, is that Florida fascist Ronnie? We don't call him Ronnie here. We call him Death Santis.
Or the shit stain.
With a shit stain.
That's good. Good description.
Okay, she asks, is he still down in the polls compared to Trump? Yes, he's still down in the polls. In fact, I think he's polling less well than Nikki Haley, right?
Yeah, Nikki Haley and like polls like here recently is beating even Joe Biden.
Oh, you think he's polling worse than Joe Biden?
Nikki Haley is polling better than Joe Biden.
Oh, I know, but is Ron DeSantis, is he polling better than Joe Biden or worse?
I don't even know. Like there was like even Tim Scott is in that Vivek, whatever the hell his last name is even beating Joe Biden.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah, that one.
Ramaswamy. Okay, so Andy says, thanks for your insight, Joe. Glad it wasn't that bad for you. Kids going back to school is spreading in a lot, but it's not so bad. Still a pain, though. Yeah.
I think if we
Andy
would have
says, I call him the Hitler, the fascist, but I was trying to be reserved. Laugh out loud. You don't have to be reserved here.
I'm not reserved at all. Like I have no chill, I have no filter. I ain't shy to say what the hell's on my mind. Joe
Yeah.
can tell you that after knowing me for nearly 8 years.
Oh, is it nearly 8 years?
Yeah, nearly 8 years you and I have been friends.
Did I know you since 2000? I started screaming in 2017. Okay. Did I know you before then?
Yeah, from an MMT forum. We were in one of the MMT forums and I saw where you had made a post saying that taxes do not fund federal spending, and I was thinking you were out of your damn mind. It was like in an MMT forum on Facebook. I saw that somebody. It was like mid to late 2015. I seen that, and it was from one of your articles. And I commented. I said, you're out of your damn mind if you think that. I was like 24 at the time, but you took your time and it please
So
educated
when you
me.
told me that I was out of my mind, how did I treat you then?
You actually treated me well, and you were actually very kind, and you actually took the time to educate me.
Good. I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I was in a good mood that day.
I have seen you in bad moods before.
Yeah, I
And
know.
those are those days I just go over here.
Yeah, I had something interesting happen to me a couple of days ago on Twitter. There's this guy was tweeting, and he was going after Laura Fielding,
Oh God.
trying to teach her, some MMT. Uh, making statements like, "U.S. prints the currency. States don't print the currency, so state level single payer won't work." Okay, so I replied to the guy and I said, well, when you look at the statement that the federal government, okay, is the issuer of the currency, that doesn't really logically imply that states can't be successful with a single payer program. So could you please show me the links, okay, that allow you to imply that state level single payer would not work?
Does this person not know what the hell a federal block grant is?
Uh, I don't know whether he knows that or not, but he obviously did not know that the states could apply to be Medicare Advantage providers to the federal government. And if they had a friendly president and a friendly CMS, that and they became the Medicare Advantage providers for their state, that they could then get all the Medicare money flowing through them. And they could already get the Medicaid money flowing through them because, according to federal law, they administered the Medicaid program in their state. Okay. Anyway, long story short, in the state of Washington, the state spends something like what is it? Healthcare was costing close to $100 billion in the state. But if they went to single payer, they could cut that cost down to $67 billion. And of the $67 billion, $47 billion could come from the Medicare funds, the Medicaid funds, the CHIP funds, and a few other small sources of funding. So to make it feasible for the state to do a single payer program, they would only have to tax $20 billion more. Now, the $20 billion or so more would be, a relatively heavy tax for the state of Washington.
They could do cannabis taxes.
Well, it turns out to be a very good trade-off for people because, of course, they don't have to pay for health care anymore. Okay, no out-of-pocket or very little out-of-pocket anyway. And, they all get health care and they save a ton of money, that way. And the money they save that way is much greater than the taxes they were paying. Businesses also would pay something in taxes because that's in part way part of the money, part of the 20.5 billion, would be raised. But the businesses also, would get a pretty good deal. At least the businesses that were currently providing health insurance to their people would actually be paying less. So it turns out that the state would be able to offer a better deal both to individuals and to businesses, and it would be perfectly feasible for the state of Washington from a financial point of view to have a single payer program. And it would be sustainable also because the taxes they placed on people and on businesses would actually amount to $32.7 billion per year. But all the state had to come up with to cover the single payer cost was $20.5 billion. So there would be a $12 billion surplus the first year, which would grow the second year. And by the third year, the state would have enough money put away that even if the complete bottom dropped out of the economy and no one was working, they could still cover the Medicare for all costs. So it turns out that Medicare in that state, that single payer in that state, and the numbers are very similar in many, many other states, like in Utah, in Massachusetts. I'm not so sure whether they're the same in New York State because I don't know whether the New York Health Act, as I read it, it would allow the New York health people to also become a Medicare Advantage provider and drive, all the private providers of Medicare Advantage out of business. And so I think even in New York, that would be feasible. And from what I know of the Minnesota situation, that would be feasible in Minnesota also. So the point is, it turns out that actually single payer is fiscally sustainable in many states. I can't say it's fiscally sustainable in all states, but I would think you would need only 4 or 5 states to get single payer, big states. This would put enough pressure on the senators from other states that they would quickly turn to supporting Medicare for all at the national level, and that then we could finally get, a national Medicare for all bill. That's sort of like scenario for how things could happen, at the state level.
Yeah, like California, Washington, New York, Minnesota. What's another state that could probably jump in the frying pan with them?
Well, I think Oregon would be
Yeah,
very
Oregon.
quickly. Yeah. So in other words, if you had state level single payer programs in California, Washington, okay, and Oregon, how long would it
Minnesota,
be? How long would
possibly
it
New York,
be because before this block was joined by
because
Arizona,
you
by
also
New
have to think.
Mexico, by
You also have to.
Colorado, by Nevada? I mean, you'd have the whole Southwest and the West would all be single payer.
And then it would force people in red states to vote for pro Medicare for all advocates.
Yeah, because people in those states would start demanding Medicare for all at the national level for themselves. They'd get a lot of opposition at the state level. So they wouldn't do state level single payer, but there'd be an awful lot of pressure on the senators from those states to support federal single payer at that level because their people would want a national single payer program so they could have the advantages that these other states have. That, of course, would mean that the state single payer programs would be ended, but they would be replaced by, a national single payer bill, the type of bill that Bernie Sanders introduced this past year and Pramila Jayapal produced as well, last year. Anyway, to go on with this Twitter story. So this guy, I think his name is Left It for All or Left for All or something like that. And I don't really know if he's a guy, but I think he is because he sounds like a guy. Uh, okay, he sort of got respectful or more respectful when I had told him that I had written 7 ebooks, okay, on MMT. So I think then he started to listen to what I had to say. But then someone else piped up, a guy by the name of AJ Kaleidoscope, something on Twitter. I don't know who that is.
Never even heard of them.
He's been following me for like 2 years or so. Okay, and he's an MMTer. I know he follows me because he knows I was an MMTer. So he comes in and he starts to tell me the same deal about how the fact that states are not the currency issuers means that their single payer programs would be doomed. And we go back and forth, okay, for a while. And this guy he's completely abandoning the ground on which he started his criticism and moving into many other issues. Okay. And it turns out that he's evidently not for Medicare for all at all because he thinks that there's no way we'll ever get a Medicare for all bill, okay, unless uh, the Congress people in this country are no longer bought by big money. So he thinks this is far too corrupt to ever have a Medicare for all bill passed. And that's really why he seems to be saying the state level programs are impractical. So he totally changed his ground and went completely the opposite way. And so,
Sending you on your ebooks.
I just stopped answering him because I knew, having followed me for so long, he must know I wrote those 7 ebooks on MMT. But he was just, I don't know what he was trying to do by, uh, talking to me about how the states aren't able to print the currency. Like I don't know that. I mean, I may not be Mr. MMT on the same level as, Bill Mitchell, and Warren Mosler and Randy Ray, but I don't think I'm that far behind.
You're really good with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think when people name the top 10 or the top 20 people in MMT,
They always name off like Stephanie Kelton, L. Randall Ray,
Yeah,
Warren Whitler, Scott Fullweiler, Scott Ferguson, Matthew Forstatter,
yeah, and
Bill Mitchell,
after a
Steve
while, they get
Hale.
to me. I'm in that
Yeah,
group. So, uh, I mean, it's just extremely arrogant for people to be telling me as if I don't know.
I may take here eventually and create a new group on Facebook called MMT for Revolution Evolution.
Cool. And I'll join that group.
Oh yeah, I'll make you an admin
Oh, thank you.
and a group expert. On top
Oh,
of that,
oh, thank you.
how about them apples?
Okay, so Andy is saying Twint is whining TTYL. She says, great program, guys.
Glad you came, Andy Candy. Glad you came.
Yeah, we're both glad you came, Andy. Real glad you came. We're always glad when you drop in, which Andy tends to do about 10 o'clock or so. I
Yeah,
think
when
that's
we're
when
an
she
hour
gets a
in.
little time away from the twins. Okay. Well, I think it's probably time to say goodnight, Greg, right?
Yep, but don't forget everybody like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and buy
Yeah.
Joe here a coffee.
Thank you, Greg. And
He,
by
he
the
gets a
way,
little grumpy in the morning if he don't get his coffee.
actually, you know what? I can no longer drink coffee in the morning. I have to drink turmeric tea with ginger instead.
That's actually really good. You should try green tea sweetened with honey.
Well, green tea, it turns out that green tea is not as good as the turmeric tea for the lectins, if you consider the lectins that are likely to be in it. So I know the polyphenols in green tea are very, very good for you, but uh, okay, I think the herbal tea is kind of better on the inflammation side. So that's why.
They say turmeric is also really great for your immune system support.
I know. Yeah, I know. And I think it's because of the anti-inflammation effect. In fact, I think the turmeric, in many ways, is better than aspirin. From an anti-inflammation point of view, I'm finding that I've been using a lot of turmeric in my food lately. Okay, I do a lot of the cooking around here, and I
Ooh, if
use.
I were to come up for a visit, I would have to do some cooking for y'all.
Oh, well, thank you. We could have fun cooking together.
Oh yeah, I'll bring my Danos seasoning as well.
Okay, what's in that seasoning?
Whole lot of stuff. Like it's got rosemary as well, herbs and spices and all that.
Oh, it sounds really good.
I used it on chicken the other night.
Oh, I bet that turned out well.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I throw down in the single wide kitchen now. I
Oh, so you have a big kitchen, right?
have a decent sized kitchen here in my single wide. I
Uh,
live in, I live in like a 16-foot wide by 80-foot long single wide trailer.
right. I guess I know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so but your kitchen is pretty roomy.
Oh yeah, it's very roomy to me.
Yeah, we have a really small kitchen. When we're both in the kitchen at the same time,
Yeah, can't.
it's kind of like we're doing a dance around each other.
It's like the do wah diddy.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny because we live in a senior development, and this is a pretty small place. Okay, it's for over 55s, the active seniors, so-called, it's part of Section 8 housing. We don't get any, our development gets Section 8 support from the federal government. So the rents here are much lower than surrounding rents, but we don't get any direct support under Section 8 because the Section 8 program at the federal level is never fully funded. The
Yeah,
Republic,
we need to get people who are pro housing elected.
oh, yeah, absolutely, we
People
do.
that are also not bought by big real estate development groups as well, because what a lot of people fail to realize is, and these are the and it's people I see every day complaining about the cost of rent going up. Don't they realize their landlord is involved with politics? If you want to get lower rent, vote for people who are pro housing as a human right. And that's what Franklin Delano Roosevelt called for in the second Bill of Economic Rights.
Yes, he did. Exactly. He called for that. He called for a national health service, essentially.
It's been said, had
A,
he not passed away with polio in 1945 inside of his fourth term, he would have went ahead with nationalizing the healthcare system
and,
post World War
and
II.
he probably would have gone ahead with the federal job guarantee also.
Oh yeah,
Okay, because he
like
thought that having a good job was a human right, and that was part, okay, of his economic bill of rights. And the federal job guarantee, of course, is the way to implement that particular human right. So somebody is sure to have told him that even as early as 1945, if he, didn't, uh, uh, if he hadn't come upon that thought himself by that time. There were many people around who could have told him something like that. Yeah, it was such a tragedy that he died. Such a tragedy. It was really like, for my family, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was so revered by my family, like he was a member of the family.
about like Bernie Sanders has been revered by many people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think much more than Bernie Sanders for the whole country. The crowds when Franklin Roosevelt died were absolutely huge as a percentage, the population. Okay, but in my family, the war had come. Okay, and my favorite uncle died uh, just before Franklin Roosevelt. So the family was mourning the loss, okay, of my uncle, and then the double blow came of FDR dying, and I mean the two things were just identified, okay, in our mind. So anyway, growing up, I became, okay, an FDR Democrat.
Like today, I'm pretty much what they would consider. I don't know who the heck would be a good independent politician today, other than probably Jill Stein, Ajamu Baraka.
Yeah, maybe Cornell.
Yeah, like I'm those type of people. Like, I feel more at home within the Green Party than I have any political party I've been in. Like, I went from the Libertarian to the Democratic Party to now being independent and green.
Well, for me, of course, the Democratic Party is no longer the Democratic Party. So I'm not a Democrat any longer.
Like, I really don't know what the hell happened to the Democratic Party other than they have went the way of the corporate elite that owned them.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to them. I don't have any puzzle about that. The people just started taking the money, and they liked it too much, and more of them, okay, were taking the money, and pretty soon everybody was taking the money because why not? Everybody else is doing it. Okay, and as you know from all the programs we had, uh, going over what the donations to the candidates were, it's just that candidate after candidate, office holder, after office holder, in both parties, whether they were on the right wing or whether they were on the left wing or in the center, all of them were taking big money. There wasn't a single exception.
There's also another politician I would say I'm more aligned with as well, and that's Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
What happened?
Especially when it comes, she is somebody who would be great for the Cornel West campaign because of how well she does with foreign policy.
Yeah, she would be a good one to get in for foreign policy if she would run green. I don't know if she would run green though. Has been inclining towards the right for some time. I personally don't see the fit myself.
Maybe she could get in there with and get on Cornell's team as a foreign policy advisor because she has seen the cost of war. So is Ajamu Baraka. They both served in conflicts abroad.
Yeah, I like Ajamu Baraka.
I
Um,
think that's why in 2016 Jill Stein picked him because of how he was on foreign policy advocacy.
you're right, and because she was kind of weak in the foreign policy area, so she picked him. She balanced herself off well. But another thing Jill Stein did well, she constructed her cabinet before the election so everybody could see who she was going to appoint to cabinet positions. And if people took the trouble to study her and study who the cabinet people would be that she was going to appoint, I mean,
Like if I would like if I were a presidential candidate and I won the election, I would have Laura Fielding be over my health care secretary. I would have Laura Fielding in my cabinet as the healthcare secretary, or either Brandy
yeah,
Weaver.
uh, she'd get rid of Liz Fowler very fast. I mean, she'd get rid of Liz Fowler the first day.
And she would be the one to. And for my labor secretary, it would be Pavlina Charneva.
Yeah, yeah, she'd be my labor secretary too. Oh, it would be either Pavlina or Sarah Nelson.
I think for Secretary of Treasury, it would be Warren Mosler.
Well, we'd have to decide because Warren Mosler could be the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, so we'd have to figure out where we want to put Stephanie and where we want to put Warren. and where we want to put Randy, but I think we'd certainly want all three of them in there. And we also have to find a place for Jamie Galbraith because he's absolutely wonderful.
Well, they do have those deputy secretaries for a reason.
Right, but not for Jamie Galbraith. He's like so senior.
And for the head of, and I would appoint a new cabinet position for reparations. And for reparations, that would be Derek Hamilton.
Either Derek Hamilton or Sandy Darity.
Or either Dario Hunter.
Yeah, I don't know how Dario Hunter stands on that.
Oh, he had, in 2020, Dee and I were volunteers for his campaign.
Ah.
Yeah. We were trying everything we could to get him the Green Party nomination because of where he stood on reparations.
Boy, I'm really puzzled by.
And he was also a very big advocate for Palestinian rights.
I know. I was really scandalized by the positions Howie Hawkins has been taking on Palestine. They've really been awful. Just awful. And on Ukraine issue also. He's been terrible, in Ukraine. Just terrible. Okay. I think Madeline's real angry at him.
With Howie?
Yeah, with Howie. I think a lot of other Green Party people are too.
Oh, Madeline would be somebody good to have in a presidential administration. He would make an excellent UN ambassador.
Yeah, I think so.
I would make her the ambassador to the UN for the US.
She'd be good in that spot.
Imagine her. I would just send her to the UN and let her do her thing and not even bother going.
Yeah, I think she'd enjoy it too.
Like, she would have so much fun at the UN.
I know she would. Okay, Greg, I think it's time to say goodnight.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, good night, everybody. Good night, Greg. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. And good night, Bonnie. You have a great night, too.
You too.
Okay, and thanks for this great conversation we had.
You're welcome. Have a great night, everybody.
Okay, good night.